an honor to be up on the stage with him today. It's also an honor to be up on the stage with my other fellow co-panelists, Ian Park, a longtime friend of mine, and Gene Bauer, great friend of mine. We've traveled all over the country campaigning together, from Arizona to California to so many states in between, Ohio and so on. Now, many people may be familiar with Gene. You know about his great book, Farm Sanctuary. If you haven't read it, I highly encourage you to get a copy of it, have him sign it, check it out. But what you may not know is that yesterday, Gene was also sharing his birthday with us, so give him a round of applause. Happy birthday! Finally making 21. We're glad to have you at the age. And I would be remiss to neglect my good friend Ashish Bhamani, whose birthday is in a couple of days from now. He's up in the audience. Ashish, who's a great activist with vegan outreach and compassion over killing and other groups. Ashish, raise your hand. Right here. Ashish is the Mac Daddy. If you don't know him, you should totally get to know him. Longtime friend of mine. Now, when a lot of people think about the Humane Society of the United States, perhaps not those of you in this room, but when a lot of people in the public think about HSUS, you may think about the treatment of dogs or cats or horses and so on, and rightly so. We spend a lot of our resources on those types of animals. But we're also concerned about the treatment of farm animals, because quite frankly, farm animals, like the dogs and cats who we welcome into our homes and into our families, are individuals. They have personalities, they have likes, they have dislikes, and most importantly, just like the dogs and cats who are in our families, these animals, the chickens, the turkeys, the pigs, the cattle, are capable of suffering. And unfortunately, on factory farms, they suffer indeed in vast numbers. Billions and billions of them suffer in ways that are so horrific, few of us would even want to bear witness to their misery, let alone participate in these acts of revolting cruelty ourselves. The good news is, though, in addition to the good news that Dr. Greger has been talking about, other good news is basically that a decade ago, this issue of the protection of farm animals was relegated to the fringes of our society. Today, though, thanks to the hard work of so many animal advocates, we are seeing farm animal protection firmly cemented into the mainstream. For example, many of you may be familiar with the journal, the National Journal. It's one of the top public policy journals in the country, read by, I'm sure, the majority of people on Capitol Hill. A couple months ago, they did a front cover feature on the protection of farm animals entitled Four-Legged Freedom. Here's the very first paragraph from their feature. Suppose you are a furry or feathery creature confined to a cramped crate or a tiny cage with your sole purpose in life to produce eggs for some human's plate, or to end up on that plate yourself. Don't you think your keeper should at least provide you with enough room to turn around freely, lie down, stand up, and stretch your limbs? We're not only winning in the pages of the National Journal, but look at the New York Times, the most influential editorial board in the country. Just about a week ago, their editorial board came out with this editorial. There is no justification, economic or otherwise, for the abusive practice of confining animals in spaces barely larger than the volume of their bodies. Industrial confinement is cruel and senseless and will turn out to be, we hope, a relatively short-lived anomaly in modern farming. Some of you may be subscribers to Time Magazine, a front cover feature entitled The Real Cost of Cheap Food, just about, a few months back. And here's what they wrote. The hidden prices of cheap food are the creeping erosion of our fertile farmland, cages for egg-laying chickens so packed the birds can't even raise their wings, and the scary rise of antibiotic resistance bacteria among farm animals. We're winning in the pages of Time Magazine as well. It's not only the New York Times and Time and the National Journal, other publications with vast readerships, such as the American Conservative, a publication I'm sure you all are avid subscribers to. This is Pat Buchanan's magazine. But even in the American Conservative, which many of you may not be subscribers to, but even in the American Conservative, a front cover feature entitled Torture on the Farm, Why Conservatives Should Care About Animal Cruelty. In which the author of this piece, who was a speechwriter for President George W. Bush, asserted that having granted that certain practices are abusive, cruel, and wrong, we must be prepared to do something about them. Now, indeed, we are doing something about them. And you may wonder, how did we get to this point? How did we get to a point where farm animal protection, what happens to chickens, is being covered in the front covers of some of the most important publications in the country? Well, let's back up a bit. First and foremost, this notion that animals deserve legal protection, that's never been a controversial issue for the most part. All 50 states for a long time have had criminal animal cruelty laws, codifying this notion that there are some things that we can do to other animals that are so abusive that we simply ought to punish them criminally. All 50 states criminalize dogfighting with felony penalties for the perpetrators. All 50 states criminalize cockfighting, 39 of them with felony penalties, and we hope Ohio will soon become the 40th. But you may be wondering, well, that's all nice and good, dogfighting, cockfighting, and having laws against setting animals on fire and so on. But where do Americans really stand on farm animals? If chickens are being fought, that may be one thing, but what if they're being raised for food? Well, fortunately, we don't have to just wonder what Americans may think. There's ample polling on the topic to look at. And I'm not talking about Humane Society polling. I'm not even talking about independent polling like Gallup or Zogby, although those do exist. Let's look at the industry's own polling itself. The American Farm Bureau Federation funded its own poll, done through Oklahoma State University. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's hardly a bastion of animal rights radicalism at Oklahoma State. What do they find? 81% of farm animals have roughly the same, 81% of Americans say that farm animals have roughly the same ability to feel pain and discomfort as humans. 95%, nearly every single one of us say that it's important that animals on farms are well cared for. You wonder who these 5% of psychopaths